the pressure and the pleasure.
Can that go at the front?
That's what she said. Welcome to the Macross Delta Recap Show, Episode 9. This is EXO, and the magical girl who I'm beginning to suspect is Lady M, Celia Rose,
Hello.
and the mecha expert that's one drink away from becoming a bad apple himself, Chad.
Hi, everybody.
All right, Episode 9, Uncontrolled on the Edge. Celia, let's start off with you. What was your opinion on Episode
So
9?
this episode, I feel like finally gave us the payoff for Messer, because we've been seeing a lot of really grouchy Messer and stressed out Messer, and kind of some hints that he was vulnerable to the VAR syndrome. And this episode, I feel like opened the audience's eyes to more information about him. And as a result, I think it worked out really well. So he's not just the grouchy member of the Delta Squadron. Overall, I liked it a lot. I don't know if it was as strong as other episodes, but I still really enjoyed it. I liked it a lot.
We have to agree that the week episodes are pretty good as well.
And it's even in a way where I'm not so sure I want to call it weak, where I'm like, well, maybe it wasn't as action packed as the last one, but it was still good and I really liked it.
And it was action packed
Hmm.
at the end. There was a lot of good action. What do you think, Chad?
That overall was pretty good. Yeah, I don't know if I go so far as to call it a weaker episode. It's just an episode with a smaller scope, and they always do this in anime. They have, especially in longer series, but even in shorter ones, I've noticed now they'll have like episodes where you will just concentrate on characters who are almost side characters for the most part, and you'll just give them some, backstory. You'll give them some character development and whatnot. It's just a way for the audience to sort of get on board and get invested in these characters who, up until this point, have sort of been what you would define as flat characters. And you're really concentrating on characters like Mirage, Hayate, and Freya. That's the reason that most of the viewers are tuning in. But you always like to, in the case of characters like Messer and Arid and Kaname and a bunch of other characters in Delta and stuff like that. I think the idea is that you always want to have at least a little bit of character development so that you can get the audience somewhat invested in who these characters are, just in case you need them to have a dramatic payoff later down the road. And I think this episode does that. It sets up a bit about Kaname, it sets up a lot about Messer. We get some context for, like Celia said, about who Messer is. And yeah, just makes him a more interesting character, gives his character some stakes, and hopefully we'll get a payoff, a dramatic payoff for the Messer character somewhere down the line.
Hopefully. Yeah, like when I say weaker, I don't mean like it was like a bad episode or anything, but is one of the slower episodes.
No, I think that's apt. I think that's apt. It is a
Yeah.
slower episode, and it also concentrates on a smaller part of the story, and we don't have a lot of plot movement happening here in the overall story. It kind of grinds the big, plot that's been happening in Macross Delta so far to a halt. But that's okay if it's, if the character work and the story that it is telling is interesting. And we all understand at this point, if we've been watching anime for a while, that this is just a temporary reprieve until we can get back onto the main story in the next episode.
It's breathing room. That's what it is.
Just fleshing some stuff out, giving a little bit of exposition, giving a little bit of more character development, and getting us invested in more than just our three main leads.
Yeah. And like you guys said, Messer was a pretty heavy part of this episode. Yeah, let's just get into his character first. In the beginning, he goes through kind of like his fevered PTSD flashback dream. From that, we get a lot of his backstory. Let's go through what he went through with that flashback and what it means to who he is today.
Yeah, so we revisited the flashback that he had in the prior episode that seemed to be triggered by the events of trying to escape and the mission on Voldor. But this time around, it's something that's coming up in his dream. And from what we can see is that he's in a city, more than likely in Marienburg, the city that Mirage mentions later as his hometown on planet Alfheim. And he's covered in blood, and there are things that are destroyed. Clearly, by this point, and what they're trying to show us is that Messer has experienced something pretty traumatic and how it's affecting him and how it even may be connected to his vulnerability to the VAR syndrome.
Yeah, and it wasn't so far back because when he looks into that mirror, you see him and he looks just like he does in the present day timeline. And we find out that Captain Arad saves him.
And yeah, we do. We get like quite a bit of context for for Messer, and especially the history with these characters. And we learn that he's from this world that was wiped out by the Var, actually a world called Alfheim, I noticed, which is in Norse mythology the home of the elves, or the light elves as they were known as. And yeah, it's kind of again keeping in the same sort of theme as so many of the other names and places in this series thus far. And apparently his towns called Marienburg was hit, and Messer, we learn, has also been inflicted with the Var, and he's, I guess, a recovering Var victim. And so that kind of explains now. I guess that sort of shoots all our previous theories out of the water, which is good because
Yeah.
they weren't that good anyway. But
Nah.
in this particular one, now we know why Messer, unlike everybody else, appears so much more vulnerable to the Var. Not necessarily so much more vulnerable, but he's definitely got more vulnerabilities than all the other characters. And so this kind of explains why, because he's been infected with it before and can, I guess, the way this syndrome works, he can easily have a relapse. But it does give us some information about how, like you said, how Arad was actually the one who rescued him. And I assume Arad was also the one who was pushing for his inclusion in Delta Squadron and Chaos, despite his disadvantage. And we also learn that Messer has a previous relationship with Kaname. When Kaname actually was first solo on her own, she was a separate solo singer. And then when she became, I guess, the original lead singer of Valkyrie, which is something that was kind of unexpected.
That was kind of sad. The way Kaname talked about herself, I think, was kind of sad also. Where she really keys in with Messer, like even after his nightmare, she's asking, like, "Are you doing okay?" Basically, what we get from this point too is that we know that Arad knows and that Kaname knows about Messer being previously infected. I don't think that either of them knew until they talked about it, that both of them were aware of Messer being infected by a Var before. And when Kaname is talking about her own backstory, where she really talks herself down and makes it sound like she wasn't good enough to be the face of Valkyrie anyways. And it sounds like Mikumo hasn't been there that long either.
I would guess that it was the three of them, Kaname, Machina, and Reina, that were the first members of Wakir.
I do think it's interesting that Messer has Kaname's solo song, though. Like, even though she was the face of Valkyrie at the time, what we can
Mm.
infer is that Axia is her solo track. And if you look at the songs that
Yeah,
have come out previously, it looks like each member has their own solo song so far, except Machina. I don't think Machina has had anything revealed to be her solo track, but that's another neat way to kind of tie in that album release that's coming out in like a month and a half now, I think. But also important that Messer has only Kaname's song on there. And even though the songs don't have the power with the fold waves and the ability for the fold bacteria to be suppressed by those fold waves using the fold receptors, that Messer still has it anyways and still listens to it.
yeah, because if he has like an attack of the VAR syndrome, it's not going to do anything for him because it's a recorded
Mm-hmm.
song. It has to be live for it to affect him.
And if you watch him during the other times he's experiencing symptoms, he does go to touch the bracelet. Like even though it won't
Yeah, he
actually like do
does.
anything, it's his first response is to touch it and just kind of keep contact with it. And I think the emotional symbolism of that for him is probably what's making him hold on and not succumb to his symptoms.
So the scene after the opening is the Delta Team conference, where they talk about foiling Windermere, and then they get into the fold receptors and how it pertains to Hayate and Freya.
So basically, they meet aboard the Elysian, and we have Arid and Kaname and a lot of the other characters sort of talking about where they stand. They've mentioned now that the Windermerian foodstuffs importing has been ceased, and as well as the water. Though they tried an investigation of who was responsible, I guess, for shipping them and selling them and stuff. And Kaname mentions that there's been several dead ends where they've led to dummy companies, and there's nobody that they can track or question or figure out how they managed to get all this stuff into the various colonies, I guess, of the Brisinger cluster, so that they could be infected with VAR. But they did do some research, and it reveals that the VAR syndrome is spread faster via the eaten food and drink. And then we have a little bit of talk about Hayate and Freya, specifically how the two of them are, how they work together, actually. Specifically when Freya is singing and Hayate is doing his pilot thing with Delta Squadron. And it's revealed that the fold receptors that Hayate has are resonating whenever Freya sings at her best, and her her own fold wave abilities are resonating as well. The two of them just happen to link up really fast, and so I think that's something that they knew on a subconscious level before, or they could feel it. I know Hayate made in previous episodes, he made several statements he made where he's like, "This feels great," or "I can, this feels good." I remember him saying specifically. So he was aware that the resonance, I guess, was happening, but he wasn't really sure why. He just knew that it was working for him, and his piloting ability would peak. Basically, it would spike during those moments. And now we get confirmation, I guess, from Kaname that this is actually the case, and this is what's specifically happening for the two of them. So it looks like it's pretty much a given that the two of them are going to be paired up going forward, as far as the Delta Squadron units being paired with one of the singers from Valkyrie.
Yeah, I really like the fact that they said that there was like dummy corporations behind it, because it kind of tells us that it's a far more complex plan than what we're seeing.
I don't know if it's all that complicated. I just think it goes to show the uh, level of commitment that the Windermerians have to this endeavor, right? And that they were willing to go to these lengths to fool everybody so that they wouldn't, the food and the water and stuff like that would never be suspected unless someone managed to find out the hard way. So, but actually, we just talking about this, we do have a scene that I think takes place pretty close after this, or maybe it might be a little bit later. But there's a section where, yeah, I think it's later in the episode, and maybe we'll save it until then.
You
I
could
can
you
go
could
ahead
go
and
ahead and
talk
talk
about it?
about it. I
Okay,
mean, if
because it's
we,
sort of a jumping off
yeah,
point in the same sort of discussion. We have a scene that takes place later with on Windermere between Royd and Keith, where they discuss how the exporting of food and water that combines to help spread the VAR syndrome has been ceased on, I guess, at least Ragna, if not all the other colonies as well. And they also discuss the different protoculture ruins on the different planets. And Roy just doesn't seem concerned at all. Actually, he seems to be under the impression that the damage is already done. And when they do use the Wind Singer to use the protoculture ruins on those various worlds, he seems quite confident that it's going to work, without a hitch. And he's also not too concerned about them knowing about the ruins either. Like the fact that last episode we had that whole sort of situation that took place around the protoculture ruins on Voldor, and Royd reveals that without a wind singer, these ruins, these protoculture ruins, are basically just rocks. So you actually need the powers of a wind singer in order to make them work, which I think is going to come back and haunt him because I'm pretty sure many of us have guessed that at least if Mikumo isn't destined to be some sort of wind singer, either her or Freya, then they're going to sort of be they're sort of going to come into that, in their own way, because they are sensing certain things. Like there's, again, we get another scene later on, I think, or maybe it was earlier with Mikumo, just thinking back to her time in the protoculture ruins on Voldor, and she's clearly sensing something. She clearly has access to try and understand how the runes work and how the wind song works, because she's clearly feeling something, and she's going with that feeling. She's not letting it go. So I think either her or Freya or one of the other Valkyrie teams will eventually figure out how to wind sing, much like Heinz from Windermere is doing.
And now that they know that they can resonate with the ruins, they are trying to access the same effects. Like the one of the scenes that this episode has is where they're singing Giraffe Blues, which is the song that Freya sang that resonated with the Paragonal ruins on Voldor. They're at the ruins
hmm
on Ragna, the Argol Petra, singing the same song, but with no effect. So they are trying, but they haven't unlocked the key just yet.
Yeah.
is there something that we're supposed to know that they're missing, or is that something that you think will come across later on.
I'm not
Mm,
sure exactly how it's going to play out, but I have a sense that it's going to be at least Mikumo who initially discovers it, I think, because she's the one who's onto it the most, I think. And everybody keeps like talking about it too. I think Arad or Kaname in the last episode or something, or maybe it was the second last episode that we watched, where they talked about Mikumo and how she senses something or she's aware of something. So I think that she has a better chance of like understanding first what's going on, at least making the breakthrough. And then, if more comes of it from there, then all the better.
I was just wondering if I missed something, if that was something that was revealed already by the
I
Windermerians
don't
or
think
something.
so.
But I
Yeah, I
guess
don't
not.
think so.
Cool. Sometimes I wonder if I'm getting the subs, if I'm getting it all or something.
For my money, I think the subs so far have been really good, actually. That's actually one of the things I don't think we've really talked about that much on the show yet is just the subs that we're looking at. The group that we're doing is the GG, I think it is.
yeah,
It's,
it's
uh,
GG
doing
subs,
the subs.
and
Yeah,
technically GG subs is now down to one person working on this.
yeah, and that just like amazes me because the work is coming out like so fast, and it seems to be like, at least from what I can tell, it seems to be pretty much on the money. With maybe some people have like some issues with it and whatnot, but I have to say that I'm really impressed with the subs, especially the speed and the context that they're providing. I think it's excellent. I'm really happy, and I'm so glad that they're doing it because yeah, like you said, I think it's just a one-man show, and believe me, I know what that's like. So yeah, I really appreciate the effort that's going into these. I think it's an extraordinary extraordinary body of work that's being done, and I'm so glad that somebody like Gigi is doing the Macross Delta subtitles. I think it's great.
Yeah, man.
Yeah.
I want to shout out Jaka of GG subs.
Oh, is that
Like
his
you,
name?
yeah, his name is Jaka. Uh, you don't have to do this, but you are, and we're super, super thankful. Because honestly, like Macross is already really difficult to access, anyways. And now that there's a new show out and someone's working on it, and it happens to be, someone from a retired subgroup that wasn't intending on completing the series, I'm really appreciative of the work that he's doing.
Yeah, because
It's
they were kind of
awesome.
like they were pretty much defunct before, right? They pretty much stopped doing subtitles, and then when this show came out, I know several people were telling me that they kind of came out from they came back from the dead, and
Yeah.
what is
Yeah, no,
dead may
it's
never die.
right. Oh, the Greyjoys.
The
Oh, but
Greyjoys, yes.
what's great is I actually started with the GG subs on Macross Frontier when I first got into the Macross franchise as a whole. So it was really neat seeing GG's name showing up on the sub files for Delta, and it's just really awesome that one person's doing all this. We need to find out if like we can like PayPal him like a gift card or something. This guy deserves kudos for putting out subs within 24 hours of Raws being put
he
up.
he at least deserves a night of wings and beer for sure.
Yeah.
Let's get into Mirage and Hayate trying to help Messer with his VAR troubles, and also how everybody thought that they were having an affair because they were spending so much time
This is such a neat little subplot. I really like it. What I think is great is that it's started by the Bridge Bunny gossip. Hayate and Mirage are just trying to figure out what they can do to help Messer, and they're spotted by two of the Bridge Bunnies out at a festival. And they come back and report to Freya and Machina and Reina saying how they were gazing wistfully into the sunset. And it's so romantic. And then one of the bunnies implies that Hayate and Mirage have slept together at some point, and it freaks Freya out. Her reactions during that scene are so funny. I liked it a lot.
Yeah, so it's kind of like a confirmation, right? That Freya is jealous of this so-called relationship.
Yeah, I've actually been waiting for them to sort of do this because I think up until this
Hmm.
point we haven't really had a lot of emotional investment from the three of them, and I mean we still kind of have that way to go, I guess, with both Hayate and Mirage. But it seems at least with Freya, her emotional investment in the relationships that she's built with these characters is pretty much being it's set. I mean, she's in. She wants to, be with Hayate to a certain degree, even if she's not willing to admit the extent yet to that, to the feelings that she has for him. But I'm really glad they started to do this, right? Because it's really sort of kicked the love triangle up a notch, right? And says, okay, well, here we have conflict or the potential for conflict that I guess nobody's been willing to say anything about yet, but we all knew was coming, kind of thing. So I'm kind of glad that they used this episode to do it. It's great too because, like we said before, there's not a lot of plot that happens with the main story of the Macross Delta series. There's not that much that happens this particular episode. So it's good that actually what they did in order to compensate, I guess, for that was they bumped up drama of the character story and started to give you some more, at least the beginnings of what will be some emotional stakes for these three characters and their relationships, and regardless of how it turns out.
Yeah, there was a moment earlier, going back to the scene with the meeting with the Delta team, where Kaname that mentioned that she resonates with Hayate, and then she just kind of looks at him and she gets all happy, like, "Oh, resonates," and then you see Mirage kind of like, "What? What's this?" They resonate with each other, and then later on, Freya finds Mirage and Hayate at Ronka Beach, and they're talking about how he does resonate with Freya, and Mirage is kind of worried that she doesn't have that relationship with anyone, actually.
Yeah, she was talking about that and wondering if it made people like her who didn't have that strong resonation with the fold receptors, if it made them more vulnerable to the VAR. But I liked Hayate's answer to that too, where he said, I have faith in Freya's song. As long as she sings, we'll be fine. I think that was a great way to confirm kind of the appearance of the character relationships that we've had so far, even though the story is starting to take them in a different direction.
To me, that was kind of like an easy out, though. It's like, yeah, you have a relationship with her, but I don't. But they cut right into the next scene. So yeah, let's get into the whole Walkure part of this episode, where they're singing underneath the surface of Ragna to the Porticulture ruins. We have this scene where Kaname walks in and Freya gets nervous and runs off, and then she has serious conversation with Mirage.
Yeah, that's the sequence where Kaname reveals her backstory to us and how she came to be a part of Valkyrie, where she said that she had a short career as a solo idol before she was put into Valkyrie because of her fold receptors. And to note on that, being a solo pop idol is actually really difficult in Japan because there are like a million of them, especially like I feel like in the East Asian market for pop singers that there seem to be like new ones all the time. And even Kaname said that her career was very short-lived and she retired because it wasn't successful. So it could just be something as simple as she wasn't managed well, or her career just didn't take off and she had to give up at least on that avenue. And it was Valkyrie that gave her a chance to live out her dream to be a singer, but also have a second chance at succeeding.
I think they're also setting her up for like her moment as well. Like in this episode, much like Messer, this is setting up something for Kaname later too. Not only in the episode itself, but I think later on down the line in the series as well.
Later on, Messer decides that he's ready to go back to work, and he gets into a paintball fight with three of the Delta team.
Yeah, we have a great short, but it's a solid little action sequence where they're doing combat training. We have Hayate, Mirage, and Chuck engaging Messer in just some mock variable fighter combat, and it is rather glorious because Messer just shows off that his piloting skills are incredible and ends up defeating all three of them simultaneously. The three of them are not impressed, and neither is Captain Johnson either. He seems a little bit worried, and we do get a brief glimpse of Ared, who kind of has a reaction. He has a little bit of a reaction in which he's clearly thinking that yeah, he's got to work his team into better shape. But I don't think he's concerned at all. I think he knows what his pilots are capable of doing. He just needs to get them there. And I think Messer is the means by which he's going to try and do that this episode. But we'll see how things develop as time goes on. I think we're going to see more and more opportunities for different types of mecha and whatnot.
Hayate was mentioning like he's using us to practice so that when he gets back into a fight with Keith, that he would be ready. Like totally obsessed with the
He
White
is
Knight.
actually a little bit too obsessed. I don't know exactly. I don't know if the show is exactly given us enough to understand the full nature of that, other than the fact that Messer is I guess, a VAR syndrome survivor, and I guess he, by extension, anybody like especially the aerial knights, probably enrage Messer in a way that no one else can, right? Because they're sort of they're often directly responsible for facilitating the VAR syndrome infecting people, and Messer, I guess, knows more than anybody else the consequences of that, of being a victim of the VAR. So I think he's personalized the VAR attack to a certain degree. He's kind of, I guess, foisted all the blame and the problems for the VAR on one person, the White Knight, i.e., Keith from Windermere.
I think it may even break down further to where they're both the ace pilots of their squadron, and who's going to be the most ace pilot between the two of them. Aside from the obvious, like, Fujoshi
Yeah.
fodder that they're feeding us every time they interact with each other, and where they put their faces real close together, they're all like, "Ah, yes, White Knight. Ah, you Shinigami." Like, so there's that. But what I see, definitely now that we know that Messer has that personal connection to the VAR, but I think there's that little element of, you're the best pilot, I'm the best pilot, I'm going to take you down, and I will be the best of the best pilots.
What did Keith say at the end of the fight?
Oh yeah, he says, it's been a while since my rune was last this color.
Yeah, it never shined so bright,
It is rather blatant, isn't it? I mean, like, we talk about, the two of these giving fodder for shipping and everything like that, but it's so like, just the dialogue doesn't do it any favors, I don't think, either.
No, they
It's so
don't
like,
hide it
yeah,
at all.
you don't hide it at all. It's sort of like in your face every episode. It's kind of hard not to ship them at this point.
And Mirage and Hayate are really aware of this obsession of his.
Yeah, Hayate and Mirage came to the conclusion together that they have to keep Messer from flying in battle. They see him as a flight risk with his VAR syndrome,
Mhm.
especially as talented as he is and as good as a pilot as he is. He's probably the last person they want to succumb to the VAR and turn tail on them and start shooting them out of the sky, because he will. So what they
Yeah.
decide to do is to confront Messer and try to make him not fly.
Yeah, let's talk about that confrontation.
Yeah, so with that one, Mirage sneaks out of the dorm and Freya senses it. Like, Freya's already been thinking a lot about just Mirage and Hayate being together since the
Yeah.
Bridge Bunnies mentioned it to her. Just, casually over dinner, like it's no big deal. And
Yeah, she's clearly got some insomnia or something like that. I think
yeah,
she's
it's
not able to
keeping
get any
her up.
sleep. Yeah.
It's keeping her up, and she notices that Mirage is sneaking out of the dorm, and initially
Yeah.
I think she follows Mirage just because she's curious and kind of nosy. Like, is she gonna meet up with Hayate? Like, what's she doing sneaking out of the dorm? And what she finds is that, yes, she is meeting up with Hayate, but not for the reason that she initially was curious about. Hayate and Mirage decided to confront Messer face to face and tell him, "You can't fly." And Messer even says, like, "I want to fight the White Knight. I'm gonna fly." And he gives them permission to kill him if he fully succumbs to the VAR, because at that point he considers himself an enemy unit.
Yeah, that was pretty surprising. I was like, whoa, this guy's like really just again obsessed with killing the White Knight or beating him and telling them like just like I told you in training, if I become your enemy, go ahead and kill me.
Yeah, I mean, it's just like Messer seems pretty single-minded and doesn't really care about, I guess, his own mortality, I guess, in that particular respect. He's just sort of like, I'm going to do what I'm going to do, and you guys have to help me out and sort of thing, right? And it's just, you also have to follow orders and just do your thing. Clear that he wants to, make sure that he's in a position to fight Keith when the time comes for like the final battle. So we'll have to see if that actually pans out. A feeling maybe it might not go down the way he's thinking.
No, and it's a sequence in
Yeah.
particular that really reminded me of Messer's age. Like, I think it's just because of the way he's drawn that makes me think he's older, but he's actually only 21. He's
Mhm.
fairly young in the first place. So I think that's where some of what I thought initially was like his commitment to the cause ends up being his single-mindedness that comes with the immaturity of being a 21-year-old. Clearly he had to mature pretty fast in order to, get to the rank where he's at and to cope with the traumas that he's experienced, but it still doesn't change that he's being rather pig-headed about fighting Keith.
Yeah, it's very unlike him from the past episodes where I don't know if we just didn't see it, but it's kind of like he was dedicated to the cause, but this has really changed his resolve. It's becoming more personal with
I
him.
wonder if he's feeling like he's running out of time because his VAR is acting up more frequently since their last mission. and if he's focusing solely on fighting Keith because he doesn't know if he's going to make it to fight Keith at a later date.
Yeah. And so finally the aerial knights come and there's all these flashing lights all over the city and they get the call and then Freya gets the call and she gets discovered by the trio.
That was great.
That was such a great little sequence, actually. I really liked it too because it came about so naturally. It's like in a situation of
Mhm.
like an air raid warning. Of course, like all the members of Valkyrie and the Delta Squadron and whatnot would all be sort of like alarmed as soon as possible so that they could get back to where they need to be and get deployed. So I think it's really cool. Oftentimes, anime will just like make a leap about, when they have a character like this who's eavesdropping on another couple of characters, they'll have some sort of contrived way to sort of get her noticed. But I think this one actually really worked because we know that they get alarmed every time that, they receive an alarm signal every time there's an attack on Ragnar or any other, new unified government colony and whatnot. So this sort of just, this came about at the right time and it was good writing because it just sort of blended right in. It's like, oh yeah, this would definitely give, Freya up. The game would be up after this sort of thing, right? So I think it's fun. I think it was great. Good little sequence.
Yeah, it was great writing because earlier in the episode they showed what's the thing's name?
Yeah.
Kiruru?
Kyururu.
And the little phone kind of interact and then it reminds you of what Freya's ringtone is. And then when that scene happens, it started going off and you're like, "Oh, Freya, you're right there and everybody can hear
Yeah, with
you,
her phone shouting,
It's
"Gori
yeah.
Gori!"
Yeah, so the aerial knights come and, of course they just ruin everything and everybody jumps into their Valkyries and then we get our action scene for the day. And then we see like one of the carriers missing from the Macross.
Yeah, Hemera. Hemera was the personification of day and one of the Greek primordial deities. So that sort of definitely sort of tracks. And it kind of fits with this episode, at least thematically as well, because there's an awful lot of sunrises and sunsets in this episode, I noticed.
Yeah.
Lots of sequences, specifically, of course, with Mirage and Hayate on the beach or or a pier or some sort of like waterfront sort of area, right? And then
They went full on
yeah,
Michael
they had
Bay
these
on us.
massive like sunsets and it looked yeah,
Magic hour
it looked
shot.
gorgeous actually. It looked really good. But yeah, it's funny how that sort of happened. And here we have the Hemera being representative of that in a sort of thematic kind of way. I'm actually we don't the weird thing is though, we're told that the Hemera isn't there, but this wasn't dealt with in a previous episode, and neither was it dealt with in this episode, and we don't even know where it is.
There could be a whole other thing that's going
Yeah,
on
they
that we're
could be
not aware of
responding to
in this
another,
thing.
like, some sort of other attack, or they could simply be deployed somewhere else. Like we are in a state,
Exactly.
like Alex, like you had mentioned earlier, we are in the state now where, like, a war has been declared, and chaos is officially being utilized as a military asset now. So yeah, so it makes sense.
Yeah, so Celia, we have Bogue versus Hayate, and of course we have Messer versus Keith.
Yeah, we've got. I think it's interesting that you have the different rivalries. Like Keith and Messer have their own competition going on that I talked about earlier, but with Bogue and Hayate, I really find them to be foils of each other, where they're complementary of each other in almost every way. And as such, they get paired together most frequently in dogfights, I think because it's more interesting that way. Well, interestingly enough, though, one of the twins is sent away from the battle to seek out the ruins on Ragna. Theo, the one with the blue hair, he's sent
Uh-huh.
away, and the whole purpose of that arrival on Ragna was Keith's investigation that he was talking about earlier in the episode with Royd, where he had said it won't require the Windsinger. And at first, they didn't use Valkyrie in this battle either. It was initially just going to be dogfighting between Valkyries until Messer
Yeah.
started to turn Var. My favorite part of it was when Kaname is like literally calling to Messer, and that was her time to shine, that Chad had talked about before, where it really sets her up for her moment in the episode, where the singing
Yeah.
does focus on her, like when they have the different shots of Walkure while they're performing to save Messer and reverse his VAR infection, where you have more shots of Kaname and her actually like calling out to Messer and saying, can you hear me, Messer? Listen to my voice, type of thing.
Yeah. Like when we first saw the designs of the characters, I really liked her character design, but then as the series started out, I thought they're not really giving her a lot. She's kind of like the fifth Walkier member, you know what I mean?
Yeah, I agree too, and I just think it's great that like one of the things that this show has been since the beginning is it has a huge cast of characters. So I think any episode that
Yeah.
comes along that can give at least some sort of way to appreciate the characters more, especially the ones that aren't always in the spotlight, like Kaname. I mean, she's there all the time. She's present. She's an actual force that's actually doing quite a bit. She's sort of like one of the unsung heroes. Not no pun intended, but I'm really glad that they upped her profile here and gave her a little bit more to do and gave her some backstory and everything like that. And it's excellent. Makes for a better all around series if you know a little bit more about the characters and you can see like some of the decisions going on and some of the struggles that they have. Right, Kaname is actually kind of playing second fiddle, and while she seems sort of content with it, I think she's also underestimating her ability to affect things. Like she's always saying, "Oh, I don't have the talent," or "I don't have this," and it's like I think with Kaname's story, the writers are sort of trying to show that you don't necessarily have to be the big star to have a great effect on events, to have agency. And I think in this episode, it kind of shows how Kaname is just like she might not be the most talented singer, she might not be the big and famous lead of the much vaunted Valkyrie group, but it turns out that it was her who has the greatest effect on Messer, and Messer just happens to be the best pilot that Delta Squadron has, right? So their relationship and their sort of resonance or their synergy or something like that, is whatever you want to call it, is one of the most important relationships actually going on, especially from a military standpoint, and what's going on, what's going to be happening with the VAR and the Windermerians going forward.
You know what I say? If I could only help out one person, then my life would be complete. That's just who I am, you know?
You're just so giving, Alex.
I am. I can't help it. I'm the most modest person I know. But what was surprising about this fight is Keith put it together, and it turned out to be a reconnaissance mission, which pretty surprising that it's not just a seek and destroy type plan. And then they actually pull out without Royd intervening, right? It's just, hey, it's time to go. We got what we came for. And they all just took off. I was like, really? They're not going to try to destroy everybody?
It's almost like it was for funsies.
I think they're learning Royd's way.
Yeah,
Hmm.
maybe a little bit more strategic rather than like always just rushing in and doing the short-term thing. They're playing more of the long game where they're like, okay, well, we don't just want to attack and destroy a few variable fighters and maybe their pilots too, but we want to actually, we're looking at the bigger picture. Like, how can we assault Ragna, and what can we do? Is there an opportunity here, kind of thing, right? So I think now that they've got the evidence of that, they had to do a bit of searching because it looks like the Ragnan protoculture ruins are underwater, so it took a little bit of searching to do. Yeah, I think they've got what they need now, and so they're more than likely in the future going to be, launching an attack, a big one. And I hope we have to hope that our heroes are prepared for it.
So yeah, like, that's how the battle ends, and then we get another quiet moment with Freya.
But there's actually a
Love.
brief sequence before this that I think is kind of important too, that we don't want to miss. That like post
Oh,
battle, we
yes.
have like a short little sequence where Messer is revealed to be at his endurance limit, and Arad helps him out, and then we have a very brief little sequence where Captain Johnson.
That's a very
It's very
important scene.
important. It's small, but it's very important. And we have like Captain Johnson talking to Kaname about Messer, and that he was basically allowed back into like active duty on the condition that reports of his condition were sent back to Lady M on a regular basis. Lady
Lady
M
M.
yet again.
I'm calling it, man. It's Milia. It's Milia, man. That's it.
Mikaru Michijo. I'm not letting that go.
So many meeples would be so happy.
Yeah, so I mean that was interesting. And it's good too because that also actually provides us with a little bit of believability as well. Because I always, every time they do something like this in anime, it always feels a little bit kind of like too crazy. I mean, I know that's insane to like we're talking about a show with transforming jet planes and singing can save the world and stuff like that. So, but it's just like it always comes across as a little crazy how you have these characters are put into positions where they're actually involved in active duty or they're making command decisions or something like that, and they're like either unstable or unreliable or vulnerable in some way. And it's like in the real world that would never happen. And so I like that they provided some sort of rationale for why someone like Messer, who is clearly unstable due to his VAR syndrome, would be put in a position where he could have another flare up or outbreak or whatever it is you want to call it, and might even harm some of the members of his fellow platoon. Sorry, fellow squadron, I should say.
Well,
So
Kaname
I'm
and
glad that
Captain
they,
Johnson, Kaname and Captain Johnson even mentioned that too, that it's insane that they're keeping him in the first place.
yes, they acknowledge that, yeah, and I'm glad that they do.
Kaname knows that Messer
That
had the
was,
bar?
yeah, that was the implication that I got. Not that anybody else knew, but that she knew that something was up with Messer, even if she didn't necessarily know it was Var. And I'm sure that she
Oh, okay.
is aware of the effect that her voice has had on him. And, but like,
Really?
just because of the talks that they were having, like this particular scene where she's talking with Captain Johnson, where she's like, so you did know, kind of like confirming, wait, you knew also, but you didn't share with us. And Messer makes a point to tell Hayate and Mirage, don't tell other people. And it's fair to give Messer his privacy in that way, where he can ask his superiors not to tell other people about what he's going through. But I feel like Kaname knew, not necessarily that it was Var specifically, but
But he was going through something. And he went full on Var. He
did
was
you
like the
see his
Incredible
muscles,
Hulk, man.
man?
He was just
He was
yeah,
like, whoom, like, whoa, been hitting the protein drinks.
he was like Captain America holding a helicopter down. He was
Yeah.
just like, ah.
Messer is Macross's only
Yeah.
very own super soldier.
I thought he was gonna pop. I was like, okay, that's it. He's dead.
And then Kaname saved him with the power of music
Yeah.
and fold waves.
There you go. That's
That's it.
Macross.
That's Macross.
Yeah.
That's the whole franchise, guys. Do you guys want to finish Freya on the Rock?
What do you mean? Is that a drink?
No.
Oh yeah, we were talking about Freya the Rocket, how funny it was.
Yes, it's also kind of an important moment too, though. We've seen Messer very guarded throughout the series so far. And this is one of the first interactions with Freya that he has that's positive. And so Freya runs outside in her embarrassment and just screams Gori Gori at the top of her lungs. And it turns out that Messer is sitting under her embarrassment rock. And they have a moment where they connect. It's really short and it seems like it's not super important, but what he talks to her about is like, how can you, with your lifespan, like he's kind of genuinely curious this time, instead of being really harsh on her for being Windermerean. He asks her, with your lifespan, how do you look towards the future? You're only supposed to live 30 years. And she responds to him, and says, well, I'm too busy thinking about now to worry about the future. And then Messer kind of smiles and seems to take her statement to heart. Like he repeats it to himself and then looks out at the moon, and then that's the end of the scene. Messer hasn't really connected with any other character like that so far that the show has shown us. When they invite him out places, he says no, or he gets really cranky and really kept to himself. So now he's connecting with someone that initially he was really harsh on anyways, because he suspected her of being from the enemy camp. So that was really neat to see Messer open up a little bit, and it makes me wonder if we're going to see more of that as the episodes continue and he starts to, I guess, trust in the people around him to know that they've got his back and that they believe in him too.
Yeah, that was a great moment. Just the fact that it was unexpected between him and Freya, that kind of like made it extra sweet.
Best show of the season, calling it right now.
All right, so do you guys have the messages?
All right, so Various Cheeses said, seeing Messer freaking out in this episode made me check all the way back to the first episode's prologue to see if the VAR victim wearing the oxygen mask in the hospital is recognizable. It doesn't look like him, though.
Do you remember that? There was a shot
Yeah, I kind of remember that.
of a
I don't remember a mohawk, though.
yeah, it wasn't him. I don't think it was him. I think it was just a random guy with a VAR syndrome.
He goes on to say, episode far as we've seen, but I was following up speculation on various forums that he might have had a VAR incident in the past. Alas, the show didn't make it that easy.
Ah, but they
They
did make.
did. They finally revealed it. He's had a VAR incident in the
Yeah,
past.
I was surprised. Yeah, well, this guy was right on. So yeah, he had the VAR before, and before he met up with Delta, and now he's still suffering through it. It's interesting because once you have the VAR, you just does that mean all the other soldiers are still will be affected by it? All the ones that they cured?
Maybe. It does definitely put them at risk, I think. I think they made a note in this episode too, where they were having that conference and talking about like how the Saidsnull works with the what is it, the fold bacteria. And I can't remember who mentioned it. It might have been Mirage or Kaname, where they ask about the people who have already been infected. And Captain Molders did confirm that people who have already been infected are more vulnerable to relapsing if they're exposed to it again.
All right, first message from Irving Miranda. Love this episode. Classic Macross is on point. Great recap. Thanks. I think he was talking about the Giraffe Blues sequence when Freya sings, and that was some classic Macross. Yeah, I think that's pretty much.
Yeah, it was a very popular reaction for obvious reasons.
Okay, so here's I guess a question. I don't think Heinz is the wind singer. I bet Freya is the true wind singer. I think you talked about that earlier.
Yeah, except I didn't put it in quite that same sort of context. I think it's pretty clear that, Heinz's power can activate these runes. So he might not necessarily be a wind singer for whatever that happens to mean in Windermerean lore and mythology and whatnot. But he's obviously one of the few who can activate the runes because he's been doing it all on his own, right? He hasn't required Freya to do it. And she's been either nowhere near or off world or stuff when the activation of the protoculture runes happens through Heinz. So I think he's clearly doing it. Now, whether or not Freya turns out to be a better like wind singer, I think that's definitely the case. I think we've already seen some evidence of that. And I think that maybe one of the reasons that Heinz is not as proficient as they want him to be with his manipulation of ruins and the crystals and everything else like that is because I think maybe the kind of songs that he's singing are part of the problem. They're kind of like draining him because they are a drain on him. They're a drain on his fold waves. They're not exactly meant to be the songs that maybe the protoculture intended to be used with the protoculture ruins. And everybody always comments on it. We had that comment from the Valkyrie group last episode where they were talking about their description of Heinz's song and how it felt and how like it was oppressive and dark and sad and everything else, and it was too much. It was such a sharp song, and it wasn't something ugly. Whereas Freya, when she goes crazy with her singing and she unleashes her fold waves and everything else, it's almost like effortless to her because the emotion behind what Freya is doing is coming from a place that's so like genuine and so good. So I think maybe that might be a little bit more of I guess an accurate interpretation of it, or at least it's my theory going forward, and I guess we'll have to find out if it holds water.
All right, Celia,
All right,
next
this one comes
question.
from Visioneer. It says Mikumo will be the most cosplayed Macross character in the near future. She's voiced by a veteran Seiyu, and her singing voice is someone who's recently been discovered. He is on the mark on that one because there are a lot of Mikumo cosplays that have been popping up on Twitter lately.
It'll be interesting how they do the hair, right? Because the hair isn't hair towards the back. It's more like I don't know why, but it looks like a dolphin skin or something because it's solid. It doesn't have any
Oh, that's only
striations or
when she's
anything like
singing,
that.
though. When she's, it is.
Is it
I've
when
been
she's
paying attention to it
singing?
because I'm gonna cosplay Mikumo. I'm one of the masses. I'm doing her mode where she's not singing, so I'm just gonna have a regular wig with curls at the bottom. Um, but I have noticed that it's only when she's singing and she's activating her fold receptors that her hair gets all spiky. But yeah, he's not wrong. I mean, the other thing to Mikumo is Mikumo kind of has the Cheryl appeal, where
Yeah, I
everybody
agree with that
cosplays
as well.
Yeah.
Cheryl.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's as well. As much as Macross Delta is appealing to, non-traditional demographics for a mecha show and whatnot, I think that the show still has to have a certain amount of appeal to the fan base for like this kind of mecha anime. And I think Mikumo definitely has that sexy, sort of scantily clad, titillating kind of appeal for like young guys. So I think that that's probably one of the reasons why that character is made sort of the way that she is. But the good part is though is that she's also a well written character as well, and we're enjoying the mystery of her character and what's going to be happening with her as far as how the plot of Macross Delta unfolds as well. But yeah, I think just on a visual look alone, I think yeah, I can understand why she's one of the more popular.
Cool, cool. I don't know if I read the person that wrote that Heinz question. That was from Kawaii Saki. Thank you, Kawaii Saki. And then the next one is actually still talking about Mikumo's hair from Vaseline 1996. Just a random theory I have that you guys can discuss in episode 9. The lower half of Mikumo's hair seems to work as a fold receptor. Perhaps the Windermereans are the last set of species created. The protoculture might have wanted to create a humanoid species like the Barge. Is he saying the
I think the
Vajra?
Vajra, yeah, from Macross Frontier, yeah.
Act as the fold quartz of the Vajra. However, they were unable to design them perfectly, which resulted in short-term lifespan. So they are failed replicas of the Vajra. Mikumo, however, is most likely the last individual person developed by the protoculture. She is probably the hybrid of all the species the protoculture created in order to create a perfect replica of the Vajra without the short-term side effects like Windermere. Before the protoculture died off, they probably brainwashed her or placed her in some capsule to be safe. Protoculture probably accidentally created the Var syndrome through messing with the Vajra. Apparently, they were afraid of them or couldn't control them. She was then awakened by the Vajra attacks and the protoculture embedded in her subconscious to sing and to try to cure the universe. Ooh, that's like walking and deep into fan
Yeah,
fiction.
there's a lot of assumptions in there that that we can't
Yeah.
really say one way or the other, and I think it's going a little bit too deep. But there are some points in there which are real good. Actually, there was a recent interview that Ollie Barter did on Forbes with Shoji Kawamori, in which they actually bring up
Okay.
one of the aspects of Macross Delta, which is indeed a holdover, or I guess just a continuing exploration of a particular theme from Macross Frontier. And he specifically says that, yeah, the VAR syndrome and the Vadra's V virus and whatnot are very similar. I can't remember the terminology that Kawamori uses specifically, but he does acknowledge like a link between the two.
I do like his point about her hair as a fold receptor.
Yeah, I was gonna ask, is that something that could work?
Maybe since she seems to change shape of it whenever she gets ready to sing.
Celia, we have not a question, but a statement from your boy,
Yeah,
Sean
from Sean
Salisbury.
Salisbury at Togakun on Twitter. Let's see. He says, my best guess for how Mulder's knew Hayate's father, which I think he was talking about, is that he was an ace fighter pilot for the UN Spacey during the Windermere War of Independence, but died during the war. And Michael Phoenix agrees with him. And he says, I still wonder if a state of the mind or heart matters with how hard the VAR hits a person. Or could it be that Messer had a bad jellyfish taco? Evil laughing ensues.
I do think it's kind of funny how Hayate this episode doesn't seem to think too much of Arid. He sort of dismisses him at one point. He says, "That guy, like all he ever talks about is jellyfish."
Yeah.
You know, it's just like it's interesting just hearing like Hayate's off the cuff sort of comment about like how he actually views Arid, and he clearly
That's true. What was the
they were
context
just
of that?
talking about like Messer and how like Arid was involved and responsible for helping him and stuff like that, and Hayate just has this like real like sort of
Oh yeah.
you know boorish moment where he's like, "That guy? Are you serious?" Like all he talks about is jellyfish. I mean, he clearly doesn't think that art is much good for anything, which is kind of funny.
And then there's the last one from James Welch. I'm surprised you missed mentioning Hayate's glowing pendant and how he basically did something directly similar to Alto's glowing sky dance in the Frontier movies. I think that's something Celia had talked about, the pendant and how it's a fold
I
receptor.
did. It's
And
fold quartz.
and I think we ended up cutting it. Yeah, so we edit the episodes but we upload it's a more complete version of the show on SoundCloud.
Yeah, you can find us on SoundCloud at soundcloud.com/Macross Delta Recap Show. That's our
Yeah, there
profile.
you go. All right, so let's close it out. Celia, where can we find you when you're not on the Macross Delta recap show?
You can find me on Facebook at facebook.com/Celia Rose Cosplay and on Twitter at Planets Twinkle. I live tweet Macross Delta every Sunday morning
She does. Well,
with screen caps.
it's more like afternoon sometimes.
I didn't
Uh,
have internet this weekend. That's why it was so late.
and Chad.
You can contact me by just sending me an email at marchingcw@hotmail.com. You can also, of course, visit my website, the Macross Mecha Manual, and you can contact me at the Facebook account for the Macross Mecha Manual, which is facebook.com/Macross Mecha Manual. And lastly, you can find me posting on various anime message boards, such as Anime Nation, ANN, and of course Macross World Forums.
This is Exo. You can find me at the Macross World Facebook page and the Macross Delta Facebook page, or you could tweet at me at Macross Tweet, the official Macross World Twitter account. And we'll see you next week with episode 10, Axia Flash.